What's up, guys? It's KB. Make sure you subscribe to the Underground Sports Philadelphia YouTube channel. Click the bell icon down below so you don't miss a single video from us. And thanks for tuning in to another video from Underground Sports Philadelphia. Now let's get into it.
Philadelphia, baby, you're going to love it. Best sports fans in the world. Actually, the worst, but that's what makes them the best.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome in to another 2022 edition of Eagles Enemies, presented by Underground Sports Philadelphia. The Eagles off to a hot 3-0 start after a big dominant win against Carson Wentz and the Commanders. And this week, we're back home, and we're welcoming back the man, the myth, the legend, the coach behind Super Bowl 52, Doug Pederson and the Jacksonville Jaguars. You already know I had to break out the Super Bowl patch jersey for this episode. But Dougie P coming back to town. The Jaguars looking like a pretty solid squad so far this year. So this should be a very interesting and entertaining matchup. And there's no better way to talk Jacksonville Jaguars and Philadelphia Eagles than with the man, the myth, the legend himself, Demetrius Harvey, my good friend, former guest of this show, now coming back as a recurring guest to talk all things Eagles and Jaguars. So before we get into the episode with Demetrius, make sure you guys are following us on the socials at UndergroundPHI on Twitter, Instagram. Follow me on Twitter at KBIZZL311. Subscribe to the Underground Sports Philadelphia podcast feed because that's where you get Eagles Enemies each and every week during the Eagles season, plus the Underground Sports Philadelphia podcast main show and the Dan Russo show every single week of Vineland High School football season, all on that feed. So go subscribe, Apple, Spotify, leave those 5-star ratings and reviews, and subscribe to the Underground Sports Philadelphia YouTube channel where you get full video episodes of Eagles Enemies this entire season, plus full video episodes of every Underground Sports Philadelphia podcast. It's the best place for content. Smash that like button, ring the bell icon, comment down below your score predictions for Eagles Jaguars, and of course, subscribe. Be a friend, tell a friend. Now, without any further ado, let's get into it with Demetrius Harvey. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. The Eagles are 3-0. Everybody is talking about them as the cream of the crop right now. And they're getting a visit from some Dougie P vanilla ice cream, a.k.a. the Jacksonville Jaguars, are coming to town with Doug Pederson, who's doing his media tour. And I'm thrilled to welcome back a friend of Eagles Enemies presented by Underground Sports Philadelphia. It's been 3 years since the Eagles have seen the Jags, but my man Demetrius Harvey is back on Eagles Enemies, and it's a blast to have you back and see you on this screen, my friend. Welcome back to the show, and I can't be happier for you because you get to cover one of the coolest coaches in the NFL, Doug Pederson.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and he has been great, honestly, to cover it. It's been a breath of fresh air. I'm sure we'll get into that more as we go on, but just being able to talk to the guy who has won a Super Bowl, he's had so much success. He knows what he's doing clearly. At least the first few weeks show that. So, I think it's just been fun, and I'm excited to continue covering the team.
To have Doug Pederson in the fold, like you said, he knows what he's doing. He's won a Super Bowl. He's been at that mountaintop. What is it like, for media members and, from your fan interactions on social media, seeing people being like, wow, we didn't miss on Trevor Lawrence. He just needed a competent head coach to point him in the right direction at the NFL level.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. Last year was just an abysmal year for the Jaguars and Trevor Lawrence. Unfortunately, he had to deal with a lot of outside distractions due to Urban Meyer and just, losing a lot. The guy came in, I think he was around 32-2 or 34-2 in his whole career from high school to college. He only lost a couple games. So for him to go ahead and lose, as many as they lost last year, 14 games, I mean, that had to have been, terrible for him. I would almost describe last season as a rookie minus season for him, just because the things that you would get as a rookie, he wasn't really necessarily able to get. He kind of had to learn some things on the fly. I'm sure he learned a lot in terms of, what he needs to do better at, protecting the ball, what he needs to work on for the offseason. But you can figure that out, in practices. So that sort of stuff And then contrast it to this year. Now it's incredible what leap he's taken. I'm not necessarily surprised that he's able to do this because it's what we saw in college. It's what we saw and why they took him number one overall in 2021. His first 3 games here, 6 touchdowns, 1 interceptions. It's just something that you can see, obviously, that coaching plays such a heavy role. The weapons that they have, the offensive line that they have, the different players that they have on the team in general has just played such a significant role in his development. I think, he's only going to go up from there.
And then you look at what this Jaguars team did in the offseason, which fascinated a lot of people, dished out a lot of money to some players that people didn't really expect to get the type of money they did. But when you look back at it, and I was looking through today just to see who was signed, it reminds me a lot of some of the moves that Howie Roseman and Doug Pederson made when he was here with the Eagles. You go get Christian Kirk, obviously not for the low amount of money that the Eagles paid Alshon Jeffrey. You pay Christian Kirk to come in and be a franchise wide receiver, but you go get that guy. You go get Evan Ingram to kind of come in and play a Zach Ertz-esque kind of role, and you already had the running backs in place, and Doug Pederson loves using a plethora of running backs, and you've got a 2-headed monster with ATN coming off the injury, and then James Robinson being the stud athlete that he is, and he's continuing to show why he deserves to be on the field. A lot of the moves, and then you go bolster the offensive line in the draft. It's very reminiscent of some of the moves that the Eagles made back in like 2016, 2017.
Absolutely. They had a plan, him and GM Trent Baalke. They knew what they needed to address. A lot of it had to do with the receivers that they didn't have last year necessarily. DJ Chark got hurt week 1 last year, and then they had to go with just Marvin Jones, who, while he's dependable, he's an older veteran who's probably not a number 1 wide receiver and maybe not even a number 2 wide receiver at this point in his career. So he's a guy that you can use, here and now, but you need that number 1 guy. You need somebody to be able to change the game. And I think they have a guy in Christian Kirk. Now, I'm not necessarily saying he's a game breaker, but the guy has proven to be productive. He's a hard worker. He's a guy who has come in and instantly bolstered this receiving group, and he's incredibly versatile, which is, to your point, exactly what the type of player that Doug Pederson likes. He likes a guy who's versatile. He's a guy who can move all across the field, similar to a Zach Ertz guy. He's a guy who can move all across the field as well. That's why they went out and brought in Evan Ingram too. So, it's clear what they had planned, and it's interesting to see it come to fruition. Now, obviously it's really early, but the plan that they had, it seems to reflect exactly what, they're actually getting. They went out, they bolstered the defense. They brought in Oluwakin at linebacker. They brought in Trayvon Walker, outside linebacker, pass rusher, Devin Lloyd. All of these guys have been major contributors so far, and I think that that's just something that, Doug Pederson has learned how to build a team, and Trent Baalke, he's a guy who, while he gets a lot of flack and maybe some deserved from the last couple of seasons and, his time in San Francisco, but, he did a really good job so far.
Were you surprised when Baalke was, kind of given the opportunity to stick around when Doug Pederson was brought in? Because I know on Twitter, from the outside looking in, it was like, why are they letting this guy stay here? It didn't make a lot of sense. He's not very successful, as a GM in the NFL for this, that, and the third. Were you surprised that, ownership allowed him to kind of stay on board with this new regime?
Yeah, I'll say I was a little bit surprised because I thought the way that last year ended, I guess this is kind of like a two-way thing. The way that last year ended, it was so abysmal that you thought they're just going to clean house. They're just going to, Urban Meyer's out, Trent Baalke out, bring in a new coach and a new GM, because that's kind of how a franchise can shift the regime to a new guy. I think that what happened, though, was more so a reflection on Urban rather than Trent. I think that Trent had his draft class, obviously Trevor Lawrence, you don't really count that because anybody could have made that pick, but Tyson Campbell, he's a guy that they selected at pick 33, and he's excelled. He looks like a pretty good player. ETN, while he hasn't had his standout game yet, is obviously going to be an impact player at some point in his career. And you can go on and on sort of through that draft class, and then moving forward, when you compare a guy like Trent Baalke with Doug Pederson, they're kind of a perfect, almost exact opposites in terms of personality. So it kind of works, opposites attract. And then you have a guy that can actually, provide the stability in Doug with, the draft knowledge and the ability to make trades and things like that with Trent Baalke. So to answer your question, it was really long-winded, but I was a little bit surprised at first, but looking back on it and in hindsight, I don't think it should have been too surprising. I think that Shad is a very patient guy, and that's sort of just the direction he wanted to go.
The NFL schedule makers did a great thing for the Eagles. They let us get our Carson Wentz rage out last week, and the Eagles defense did just that with 9 sacks. Doug Pederson gets to come to Philadelphia, though, this week. What has it been like this week, talking with Doug, in media availability and just, his excitement to kind of come back and, get that opportunity to be reunited with Philadelphia one more time since he left back in 2020?
Yeah, you can tell it's funny. You can tell he's excited, but at the same time, he doesn't really want to let people know he's excited, if that makes sense, because, he's kind of been downplaying it a bit to us, which is obvious. You're going to do that. But, he's happy to be able to go back into a place where he won a Super Bowl. He understands the importance. He understands why it's even a topic. He told us today, actually, that he hasn't seen his statue yet, which shocked me because – I would figure, if I'm a guy who got a statue made, I would instantly go and take a picture with it. But, maybe that's just the kind of guy he is. He doesn't really care. But no, it's been interesting to see. And I think that the reception is going to be interesting too. I'm not sure. Maybe I can ask you, do you think they're going to boo or they're going to cheer?
I think Doug, being that it's, a couple years removed since 2020, and I think a lot of that was more so just on Carson Wentz than Doug Pederson when you look back at it. I think Doug's going to get an unbelievable welcome back. He's the first coach, to win a Super Bowl here. He is that lovable figure. A lot of people compared Doug Pederson to Charlie Manuel with the Phillies, in that sense where, he's that lovable, uncle kind of figure, and everybody just loved Dougie P. So I think, with Doug's history with this organization too, having played for the Eagles, then he wins a Super Bowl as a head coach, I think Doug's going to get a fantastic welcome back. And then, once the game starts, it'll be, all systems off until about 4:00. But I think looking back at the Doug Pederson era, a lot of people really connected with and enjoyed Doug for a lot of reasons, and I think he's going to be a head coach that goes down, even removing the Super Bowl from everything. There was a lot of success under Doug Pederson, and I think a lot of people will, put him in their pantheon of all-time Eagles coaches, even though it was such a short window in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, I can see that, and that'll be awesome for him. I mean, I'm sure, he and his wife, they love their time there. He's talked about it. They enjoyed their time in Philly, and I'm sure if he had it his way, he would have stayed there for the rest of his life, or at least the rest of his career. That just seems like the type of guy he is. But taking a year off, it seemed like that was sort of what he wanted to do. In hindsight, once he was able, he was semi-forced to take a year off, but he had opportunities. He could have jumped back in as an OC or whatever it may have been, but he was able to sort of regroup and reset his mind, and you can just tell that he's a really refreshed coach. He's not somebody who's overly stressed. He's not. He doesn't come in and all of a sudden the mood is down. So I think that he's going to enjoy his trip up to Philly. Now, if they lose, I'm sure he'll have a little bit of a different perspective, but obviously going up there the first time, I think that that's something exciting for him.
Who has kind of been the player for you that, watching 3 weeks through this season in training camp that has kind of, really made you take a step back and be like, wow, like they're going to be a pivotal part of the 2022 Jaguars?
Yeah, that's a good question. If I had to pinpoint one guy, it sounds silly to say Christian Kirk, but it might really just be him because
he's proving so many people wrong.
Yeah. Coming in, I wasn't necessarily a guy who said, "Oh my God, I can't believe they paid him," just because I know how, that's how the markets work. I mean, he was pretty much the only wide receiver anybody could pay. He was going to get some sort of big money, regardless. But I didn't necessarily think that he was going to have this much of an impact so early, where, between him and Trevor, that chemistry just seems to click like right away. Even in practices during training camp, at first it didn't really look that great in terms of timing and all that, but all of a sudden, it picked up right near the end. So, having seen him over the past 3 weeks, his play has been unbelievable. I think that he forces defenses to, have to keep an eye on him. He's a guy who's going to go in the backfield. He's a guy who's going to line up in the slot where he excels. He's going to play outside sometimes. He's going to do a bunch of different things where if you don't keep an eye on him, then he's going to sneak past you. And that's what the Colts learned, and that's sort of what the Chargers learned at one point too. So he's probably the one player who I don't know if it's a surprise necessarily, but he's a guy who absolutely I've realized, or I've become to realize more, that he's going to be incredibly important. And if they lose him, he's a guy that is very hard to replace.
A lot of people starting to talk about the Eagles in that, elite category, being one of 2 3-0 teams now. You see what they did last week against Washington, getting the 9 sacks on Carson Wentz. What do you think, is going to be a key for this Jaguars offensive line to try to contain the likes of a Brandon Graham, Josh Sweat, Javon Hargrave, Fletcher Cox, Jordan Davis? The list goes on and on. And it's crazy to think about all the depth that is here, that Doug Pederson also got to coach, and now some of this new blood that's also in the fold, especially, with Jordan Davis and the refrigerator that he is, 300 pounds stuffing up the middle. What are your expectations for how, this offensive line for the Jaguars is going to match up against, just from all angles, this Eagles front can kind of present?
Yeah, that defensive line is nasty. I saw what they did to Carson, and it was just kind of sad to look at. But yeah, the Jaguars will have their hands full. The past couple weeks, particularly against the Commanders, they have some pretty good interior defensive linemen. I know that Chase Young was out, but the Jonathan Allen and guys like that were still in, and they had a little bit of trouble with them. But the past 2 weeks, even going up against Bosa, I know that Bosa was knocked out early, but Khalil Mack as well, they didn't allow any sacks over the past couple weeks. They barely allowed any pressures. Trevor is getting the ball out of his hands very fast. I think that's going to be sort of the way that they're going to try to beat the Eagles. I know that their secondary is nasty too now. So the biggest thing for them is to just make sure that they get the ball out of their hands fast, or get Trevor to get the ball out of his hand fast. And then also probably rely on the run game. James Robinson is a guy who nobody expected to be back right now, or I shouldn't say nobody. A lot of the outside media didn't expect them to be back. A lot of the outside fans didn't expect them to be back. But certainly nobody expected him to be back to this level of play this early in his, recovery from his Achilles tear just last year. So, having a guy like him being able to pound the rock and sort of open up little lanes for the passing game is going to be completely pivotal. I do think that the Jaguars offensive line is playing well. Jawan Taylor's playing at an elite level right now, especially pass blocking. Cam Robinson is playing well. Brandon Sheriff has come in and sort of re-energized that offensive line, in my opinion. I think that was a slam dunk signing, probably their best. And then, you have Luke Fortner, who's a rookie, and Ben Barch, who's a third-year player, kind of finding his way. The first week he didn't really play that well, but the last couple of weeks he's been solid. So, I don't necessarily think that they're going to have, the shutout performance that they've had over the past 2 weeks against the Eagles, because I do think that this defensive line is that good. But I do think that they're a lot better than what maybe people would have thought they would have been coming into the year.
You bring up the Eagles secondary as well, with Darius Slay, James Bradbury, Avonte Maddox playing, I think, extremely well, that not enough people are talking about just because of how well Darius Slay and James Bradbury have played. CJ Gardner-Johnson now in the fold. Marcus Epps is playing fantastic as well. How do you view, that matchup with the likes of Christian Kirk probably catching the Darius Slay matchup? Looking at how Evan Ingram, knowing this Eagles team relatively well from his time with the Giants, how he's going to match up against this Eagles coverage team. How do you kind of view that breaking down, if you will? Just because I think it's a fascinating matchup with the way that the Jaguars wide receivers speed, how that presents itself going up against this Eagles secondary.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. And you mentioned him, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, or CJ, I guess now he goes by. He has always been one of my favorite players to watch in the league, just because he's a guy who can play pretty much any position in the secondary. I feel like he can, at least. I know they're playing him, I guess, at safety and maybe some down at nickel at times. I don't know, but the biggest matchup obviously is going to be Darius Slay against Christian Kirk, and I'm curious if they're going to follow, or if they're going to have Slay follow Kirk, because I know that Slay's been doing that a couple of times during different matchups this year. So to see that matchup, I think that this is going to be a very good game in terms of finding out if the Jaguars' weapons are actually real. Are they actually going to be good, or was it just the past couple of weeks? They were able to scheme it open, sort of have their way with the opposing side's defense. I think that Gannon is a pretty good defensive coordinator down there, or up there, I guess, and he's a guy that's going to be ready for what Doug has to throw at him. I know that they didn't work together, but you can sort of look back on what Doug Pederson did with the Eagles, and it's pretty much the same thing that they're trying to do here. Maybe a little bit less tight end play than we would have thought so far, but overall, I think that they've been pretty reminiscent of what the Eagles tried to do, or were able to do successfully over the years that they were there. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think that the biggest thing for the Jaguars will be to utilize that speed, like you mentioned, just being able to keep the Eagles sort of on their heels, not exactly telegraph what they're going to do. And then again, the play action pass, the run game, going against an aggressive defense, you sort of should rely on that a little bit more. I think that that's sort of what you're going to see on Sunday.
And then on the flip side, how do you view the Jaguars secondary going up against what has been dubbed the Batman? You've got swole Batman, fast Batman, skinny Batman, and today on Jason Kelsey's podcast, he said that if they execute properly, he's wearing the Batman cape and he's going to be fat Batman. So how do you view the Jaguars secondary matching up against the likes of A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Quez Watkins, and obviously, Dallas Goedert, and some of these running backs that the Eagles have that, so in my opinion, they haven't used to their full potential yet this season in the passing game. But when you have guys like Boston Scott, Kenny Gainwell, Miles Sanders, how do you view that matchup kind of breaking down from the Jaguars' defensive standpoint?
Honestly, when you lay it all out there like that, it's kind of crazy how much talent they have.
It's wild.
On offense. That's a very special offense. Jalen Hurts. We didn't even mention him yet, but he's a guy who has proven me wrong. I didn't think he was going to be at the level that he is right now, and clearly, he's a guy that has taken ownership of it, and he's a very mature kid, and he's able to get it done. But yeah, those weapons, AJ Brown. I mean, I to this day I don't understand why the Titans did that, but they helped you out a little bit there, and
quite a bit.
Yeah. And so, I've always loved Devontae Smith, and I've always thought that he was going to be a incredibly talented player, and he really is. And Dallas Goedert or Goedert, I don't know how to pronounce his name.
It's Goedert.
But Goedert, okay.
I always tell people it's like the Jimmy Neutron dog.
Yeah, okay, there you go, Goedert. But yeah, no, it's going to be probably the biggest test, or I would say it is going to be the biggest test that this Jaguars secondary has had to have over the first few weeks of the season, just because, week one, Terry McLaurin is a great receiver, but, Dotson was a rookie. The other kid, I'm blanking on his name, Curtis Samuel. He's a guy who's, back and forth kind of, I don't know. Week two, the Colts, Pittman was out. They didn't really have anything. And then the Chargers, Keenan Allen was out. So this week is going to be the biggest test for guys like Tyson Campbell, Shaq Griffin, if he plays. He didn't play last week because of a hip injury. He was limited today. I think he'll play, but we'll see. And then, obviously in the back end, Andre Cisco, who's proven himself to be a pretty good player. He hasn't had necessarily those playmaking big plays yet, because, it's only been a few weeks. He's had one interception. Rayshawn Jenkins playing a little bit better than I would have anticipated. And then Darius Williams in the slot. I think that's probably going to be one of the biggest matchups because I know that they move Smith around a lot. I know that they moved Goddard around a lot. I think that inside is going to be huge for the Jaguars. And obviously the linebackers, I think that's one of the strengths of the Jaguars team right now. So, you got Devin Lloyd, you have Foye Oluwakin. Those are two guys who have come in and made an instant impact. And I think that's going to help the middle of the field, and that's going to help the secondary a bit with those guys. And we'll see. I think that it's going to really come down to how much pressure the Jaguars can get on Jalen, and sort of see if they can keep him in the pocket, but also sort of crash the pocket so he can't run, but and then he also gets sacked, and just sort of play tight. It's going to be a pretty fun game to watch. I have a feeling, and I'm looking forward to watching it.
Yeah, I think my X factor is just Jalen Hurts continuing to prove everybody wrong that he can pass the ball. He's not a sponsor of this show, FedEx Air Player of the Week this week, voted on by everybody. So that was pretty cool to kind of see, like, hey, there's one feather in the cap for Jalen Hurts to prove that he can get it done with his arm. But I think it's going to be him continuing to utilize his arm in the pocket and being able to roll out, create time for A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, and even Quez Watkins, on those deep shots to, give them space, give them time to execute their routes properly. Who do you view kind of as the X factor in this game, one way or another, that, could kind of swing, a win for either the Jaguars or the Eagles?
I think Josh Allen. I think that he's playing out of his mind right now. He might not have all the sacks. He only has 2.5, but he's top 3, I believe, in pressures right now on the as an outside linebacker, and he's a guy who can change the game. He if he can get after Jalen Hurts, and sure Jalen can run, but maybe Josh gets to him before he's able to do that. Strip sacks, things like that. I think that the pass rush in general is going to be the X factor of this game, because I think that once the Jaguars get on a roll, they're pretty much rolling it. I think we've seen that in the past. It's a completely different team, but the 2017 team did the same thing. Once they started getting turnovers, then all of a sudden everything opened up and it was lights out. So Josh Allen to me is probably going to be the X factor. I would normally go with Trevor, but he's a guy who I think is going to look solid regardless. I know it's going to be a tough game for the Jaguars offense, but I don't necessarily think that he's going to be the one and only guy. I think that the Jaguars defense is going to have to stop this Eagles offense.
So, Demetrius, since the last time you've been on Eagles Enemies, we've implemented a new final question that's kind of quirky about the team that our guest covers, involving you as well. And obviously, everybody here in Philadelphia knows Doug Pederson loves him some ice cream. So if you had to pick, it's yourself, it's Doug Pederson, 2 players to come along with you and Doug to go get some ice cream, who from the Jaguars are you taking with you?
Oh, that's a good question. Let me think. Zay Jones is probably one of the most interesting players on the Jaguars team. I don't know what it is about him, but every time we do an interview, I can't tell if he's being serious or if he's joking or what's happening, but he sounds incredibly smart. So just going, to have an ice cream with him would be fun. He's a really cool guy. I think that he'd probably be a really chill guy. Another guy kind of, let me think, like a kind of crazy guy in the locker room. Roy Robertson Harris is hilarious. I think that maybe he would be fun to go with. Probably him. Yeah, probably Roy Robertson Harris and Zay Jones. Kind of 2 complete opposites in terms of their personality, but I think it would be a good time.
There it is. Let's go get some ice cream. Demetrius, it's always a blast having you on the show. Let everybody know where they can check out your Jaguars coverage, follow you on social media, and I'm sure we're going to be talking about this game come Sunday a ton. So let everybody know where they can check out the Jaguars side of things of this matchup.
Absolutely. I appreciate you you having me on. But just Jacksonville.com, if you want to go there, click on the Jaguars tab. You can find all my content there, or you can find me on Twitter at Demetrius82. Don't ask me why there's an 82. There says so. Those are probably the 2 places you can find me, and yeah, it's gonna be a fun game.
It's going to be a blast, and looking forward to seeing Doug Pederson back in Philadelphia. Make sure you guys follow Demetrius on social, check out his stuff, and let's have ourselves a game on Sunday, my friend.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Big shout out to Demetrius for hopping on the pod this week. Everybody down in Florida, stay safe. And of course, Eagles-Jags is going to be quite the showdown. I'm excited for this matchup. Sirianni versus Doug Pederson. This Eagles D-line against the Jaguars O-line. And of course, this Eagles secondary going up against Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, and Trevor Lawrence. All at the link on Sunday. I fully expect Doug Pederson to get a rousing round of applause and welcome back to Philadelphia pregame. But then when the game starts, it's all bets are off, Doug. And then once the game ends, we go back to loving you. That's how it goes. But I'm excited for Eagles-Jags. I think this is going to be the first true test for the Eagles this year with how the Jags have played so far this year. I think the Vikings are frauds, so that game was signed, sealed, delivered from the jump. But make sure you guys are following us on the socials to keep up to date with everything Eagles during the season, off season, and in between at Underground PHI. It's your best place for Philly sports content. Of course, follow me on Twitter at KBIZZL311. It's Underground PHI on Twitter and Instagram. Subscribe to the podcast feed, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, we are there. Leave those 5-star ratings and reviews. It really helps go a long way for more people finding the podcast, more people finding what we do here at Underground Sports Philadelphia. And of course, we want as many people jumping on board with us and riding with us all the way to outer space where we want to take this thing. And of course, subscribe to the Underground Sports Philadelphia YouTube channel. You get full video episodes of Eagles Enemies and every Underground Sports Philadelphia podcast on our YouTube channel, plus other, original creative content that we're putting up there. So go subscribe, smash that like button, ring the bell icon, and comment down below, like I said at the top of the show, your predictions for Eagles, Jaguars. We want to hear from you. So go do that thing. But this has been another edition of Eagles Enemies presented by Underground Sports Philadelphia. Big thanks to Demetrius for hopping on the show. And you already know, Sunday rolls around, and every day of the week, ladies and gentlemen, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, it's Go Birds. We'll see you next week.